All right, everyone. So welcome. We'll turn on the slides in a minute. Here's my colleague Ian. We're going to be talking about coaching and our particular approach, which is accomplishment based. And then I'm going to present a little bit of an overview, an introduction, and then Ian and I will have kind of a dialogue after that and explore some aspects of this approach, and then we'll take it from there. So let me start the slides. And I'm going to start those. So the title perhaps is a bit poke in your eye or whatever. It's like, what's so great about accomplishment-based coaching? But we think it's a big deal. And just to give you some perspective on this, the reason we're doing this session is because we've been looking out there. We developed a coaching program about 8 or 9 years ago. And it goes along really in some ways with our performance thinking, performance consulting certification program, in that the assumption is that in any given organization, there's lots of folks who are managers and leaders, and there's a relatively small number of people who are performance professionals. And many of the folks I see in this the list of attendees are in that category. And what we always said is there's a lot more managers and leaders than there are performance professionals, and we need to engage them. Because if we're going to drive continuous performance improvement in an organization, we need to have those folks who are managing a lot of the day-to-day conditions for performance sort of working with us and partnering. And that's a classic aspect of performance consulting. So we developed a coaching program, which we ran for some years, and there were a few large companies like Change Healthcare, who where we certified folks, and they trained like 400 or 500 managers to use this approach, and some behavioral health organizations and so forth. And then COVID hit, and people quit training folks in person. And so we had not changed our coaching program to be a virtual program because we thought, when you're coaching somebody, you're kind of sitting across the desk from them usually and having a sort of very human conversation. But of course, COVID changed everything, because now it's routine to have conversations on the screen, and people are used to working that way. So we have redesigned our coaching program to be virtual, broken into multiple sessions, and we're planning to pilot the new version sometime in the next few months. And in that context, we're thinking, wait a minute, how is our thing different? And our thing is accomplishment-based, so that's what we want to explore today. And before I get into that, next month, our webinar is going to be called perhaps a bit, what's at stake here? And it's about business results. As you can see there, that's our performance chain model. That's a very simple model. It's familiar to people, I'm sure, where we talk about starting out with business results when we have conversations about performance. And that's just a short list of what some organizational level business results might be. And we want to talk about how we in the performance thinking community talk about and use our understanding of business results. So if you want to register, you can use the QR code, or you may already be registered for this. If you've checked off when you've registered before, sign me up for future ones. So here's today's agenda. I'm going to try to be very brief, maybe 20 minutes max, so that we can Ian and I can have a conversation, and then we can see if you all have some things to say. But I want to just quickly, even though many of the people in this group already know what we mean by being accomplishment-based, I want to talk a little bit about how we've interpreted and how we've approached the notion of doing performance analysis and performance improvement based on a focus on accomplishments, or what Tom Gilbert called the valuable products of behavior. Want to talk a little bit, very high level, about our two models and the logic of performance thinking. And then again, a little bit about how our coaching process works. And then Ian and I are going to have a conversation to try to kind of explore that in a little bit more detail. And then we'll see, depending on timing and so forth, if you're still around, maybe we can have some conversations with you all. Last couple times, actually, we've had some pretty interesting conversations. Erwin, for example, and others who are here have engaged in those. So maybe we'll have a good talk toward the end. So as many of you know, this is kind of where we start. This is this is Tom Gilbert. And Tom Gilbert said, rather famously, in his book, Human Competence, which is still taught in a lot of graduate programs. In the great cult of behavior, behavior itself is viewed as an end rather than as a means to an end. But then he said we must enable people to produce accomplishments, the valuable products of behavior. Now, I can see many of the people in this group who I know have read this book and were influenced by Gilbert, and it was a big paradigm shift. And in the International Society for Performance Improvement in particular, there were a lot of folks who moved towards being accomplishment based. Now, my view about this is that people define accomplishments in quite a wide variety of ways. And we've not wanted to argue with folks about the definition of accomplishments, but we coined the phrase work outputs to be very specific. And what we mean by those are accomplishments, but they're the products of individuals, teams, or processes that deliver value in the organization. So this is where we start. Now, if you think about sports coaching or athletic coaching, which I often do, you recognize that there's kind of these three elements in any performance in an organization. There's the behavior, in this case, this soccer girl, if that was a animated, if that were a video, what's she doing? She's behaving, she's kicking the ball. But what's the accomplishment? What's the work output? It's getting the ball it's the ball in the net. It's a goal. That's how you get points. And so that's how, in the case of a professional soccer team or football team, you literally contribute to business results. If it's just the back of the park kind of informal soccer game, you're still contributing to organizational results. But we've used this soccer girl example for years. But one of the things that's striking to me about coaching is when I think about coaching, I think about, coaching a football person who maybe, let's say American football, you're working with a kicker, you want to get the ball between the uprights. That's what you're trying to accomplish. Or you're trying to get a home run or an on base, or you're trying to get the golf ball in the hole. These are all very distinct work outputs. And what always strikes me when I look at the coaching models out there in the business world is that most of them don't look like that at all. Many of them look more like non-directive therapy, actually, where I'm going to ask you a lot of different questions, and then that will help you figure out what you want to talk about or the problem we want to address. And then we'll ask you some more questions, and we'll try to help you come up with a solution. And that's all good stuff. But what's fascinating about it to me is, first of all, it's not very directed toward a specific output. And even often when you get to the end of that conversation, you're talking about behavior, you're talking about what people do. And so we want to make a distinction between our accomplishment-based approach and virtually every other approach to coaching we've seen, which tends to be behavior-based. Now, the elements of performance, as we define in our performance chain, look like this. And many of you who've been through our programs or seen our webinars know this. And what we always say is you start out with business results, whatever the conversation is, whether it's a big project you're undertaking, an informal situation, or an individual coaching, you're trying to understand, like, what's at stake here? Why are we having this conversation? What are we trying to contribute to? So business results are definitely, starting with the end in mind in the conversation. And we can talk about organizational level business results. This is a short list. And in our programs, both our coaching programs and our performance consulting programs, we try to get people real clear in their organizations what the vocabulary of business results are. But, that's when we start. We say, what's at stake here? Is this about profits, or is this about market share? Or is this about customer engagement? What is this? And then we go to accomplishments, or to use our phrase, work outputs, because those are the things that deliver value, that contribute to organizational results. And in fact, if you use Tom Gilbert's notion that accomplishments are the valuable products of behavior, what you say is they're valuable because they contribute to business or organizational or societal results. And so we get into those work outputs. This is what we think is at the core of performance improvement. And so we have a tool we call the individual performance map, where we actually have conversations with people. There's a few people here, I think, from the behavioral health, applied behavior analysis world. So you might recognize this job title, a clinical supervisor, who may well be a board certified behavior analyst or a licensed behavior analyst. And what you see on this performance map is around the outside. You see the recipients or the customers. And then all those things in bullets are, as we always say, countable nouns. They're things that people produce that deliver value. Some of them are very tangible things like documents or widgets. Some of them are less tangible, like decisions or recommendations or suggestions, but they're still things that we can define. Here's another example, an instructional design manager, not quite so many work outputs, but again, you can see that that person delivers quite a few things to their customers. And when we do this with people, of course, they're always kind of blown away because you can get somebody's whole job into an individual performance map like this. And then here's one other one. This was actually interesting. This was from an executive coaching session that I was doing with a fellow who's a chief learning officer at a bank. And his sort of portfolio was about digital transformation. So if you look around some of the things that he was producing, some of them things like vision for digital transformation, or there's a couple of others like that where you see the digital transformation part was really part of the output. But anyway, those are examples of jobs defined by their work outputs. Once we know what the work outputs are in a given person's individual, or it could be in a job title or role, now we're in a strong position to go to behavior, because we're not just figuring out, well, what behavior might be important. We're saying what behavior produces those excellent examples of those plans, those decisions, those relationships. And so we can use task analysis, but we can also use exemplary behavior analysis by identifying the people who produce those outputs at a very high level. And then we can go watch them, and we can figure out, in some cases, what some of their unconscious competence, their tricks might be. So in this whole chain, of course, there's sequential dependencies. The work outputs are valuable to the extent they contribute to business results, and the work outputs define in a way what behavior is needed. And then finally, once we know what behavior is needed, we're in a position to say, okay, what are all the things that either are in place or ought to be in place to support or enable that behavior, and in some cases, stuff that gets in the way that we need to fix. So, and then when we get there, we use our 6 boxes model, which most of you probably know is, I sort of encountered Tom Gilbert's behavior engineering model in the 70s, and 80s, but I found that a lot of people were having trouble with the vocabulary, so we tweaked the language for several years, and about 1988, we said, this is our version. It's plain English. People don't make mistakes with it. It's user tested. And we even have a webinar there if you're interested that goes into much more depth about that. But this is our framework for behavior influences. And here's an example. This is a job aid that we use. This has, is the best we can do on a single piece of paper, all the kinds of things that ought to be in place or could be in place to positively support or enable behavior. And by the way, I don't want to make a big deal of this, but I always mention it because it's kind of cool. One of our colleagues, who is not with us today, but he organized a session at the International Society of Performance Improvement in 2022 that I didn't even know was happening. And people nominated and voted on what he called the best performance model in the world, and 6 boxes won. So at least people find it useful. Now, the way we view leadership and management and supervision and coaching is that the primary role or job of a person in a leadership or supervisory or management role is to arrange behavior influences so the people that they lead, manage, supervise, coach will be both productive and engaged. I mean, you can be productive if we get out the whips and treat you like slaves, but you probably will be engaged. We want to optimize the conditions so that you'll not only be successful, productive in your job, producing those valuable outputs, but also competent and happy about it and engaged about it. So that if you sort of stand back and look at the role of leaders and managers, this is what we think they're responsible for at whatever level they work. They may or may not be the smartest person on the team, but that's really not their job. Their job is to enable other people to perform. Now, if we apply this to coaching, and I should mention this logic is exactly what we teach in our performance consulting certification program, our performance thinking practitioner program. But again, if we're having a conversation with somebody, particularly if there's some topic that we want to address or some output, we say, what's at stake here? We want to be sure we understand the business context. And then we say, what are the work outputs? And in our coaching program, we actually sit down with the person and create an individual performance map like the ones that I showed you a minute ago. So if I'm coaching you, you and I are very clear about expectations about what your job is, about what you deliver to who customers, and you might even, with clarification on that, especially if you're new to your job, be going and talking to those customers to find out what they consider to be good and what the requirements are and so forth. But the point is, the business results set up the context in some ways for how we look at the work outputs and which ones are valuable and important. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we're in a position to say, okay, how much do we need to talk about behavior here? Now, in a coaching situation, many of you, I see some of the names here, probably quite a few of you are know about situational leadership, which is a leadership and management program that's been around in several versions for years. And a way I always think about it, it's about how much detail and how directive do we have to be when we're coaching or managing somebody. It may well be that they know exactly what to do. And the issue has nothing to do with whether they know the correct behavior. It might have to do with the fact that we need to provide better support, or they need some resources, or they would value some feedback, or whatever it is. But the point is, we get to behavior, and in a coaching conversation, we have whatever level of discussion we need about behavior. I should also mention something else. I'm going to back up here. And this slide, just realized, does not say what it sometimes says. But when we talk about work outputs, whether we're being performance consultants or whether we're being coaches and managers, we also talk about what we call criteria for a good one. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. But the idea is, let's say we're talking about a kind of report or a decision or a widget. We say, okay, what are the characteristics that make that good? What are the standards here? Because we're trying to crisply set expectations for the performer. And also that affects what behavior you might use, to produce a thing that meets those criteria. So I just wanted to mention that. Very often under work outputs, it says criteria for a good one, and we're going to come back to that. And then we know what behavior is necessary. Again, task analysis, observe successful performers, etc. And then we can begin to talk about what we're going to monitor. And what I mean by that is measure. In a coaching situation, we may not be doing a lot of formal measurement, but we might be monitoring the business results we're trying to achieve here. We might be giving people feedback and paying attention to their behavior. What we've found is that work outputs, which are often, even if they're not physical, are a little bit easier to count, manage, monitor the good ones and the not good ones. In any case, that's a conversation we have about, okay, how are we going to tell if it's getting better, basically? And then we go to behavior influences, and we have a little conversation. Again, we use in both our performance consulting approach, but also in our coaching. It's like, let's take a look at what's working for that output that we defined, because by now we've defined an output that we're going to work on, either because it's something that needs improvement, like if you're a behavior analyst, maybe you're a behavior technician who's a frontline clinician in a behavioral health organization, and you do session notes. Well, maybe your session notes aren't quite up to speed. So we might say, let's work on making those a little better. Or you might have a career path or a next job you're trying to go after. So we might focus on an output that's needed for that. Or there may be some new project that we have coming up, and nobody on the team knows how to produce a certain kind of report or whatever it is. And so we might focus on that. But in any case, we focused on a work output. We figured out what we're going to monitor. We looked at the behavior, and now we say, okay, what's working now? If this is an existing performance, like what's working and not working and missing in expectations and feedback and tools and resources and so forth. So we have a conversation with our coachee, to use that word, which is about what's working and what's not. And then we brainstorm. Then we say, what could we do? Would it be helpful, for example, if I met with you for a couple Fridays over the next few weeks and gave you a little bit more feedback about those notes? Or would it be helpful to get a checklist and help, be real clear about that? Or maybe you should go over and spend the morning with Bob, because Bob is really good at this, and that might be a helpful intervention. So the point is, we come to then some agreement between the coach and the person being coached about what action steps can we take to improve behavior influences or optimize those to help you be able to behave in such a way that you produce the work outputs to criterion to deliver to the business. So that's kind of a very high level logic of how our coaching process works. And it typically kind of looks like this. At the end of a conversation, the first session or two, you've got an individual performance map, as you see in the top. This might be, for example, your clinical director coaching a clinical supervisor. And then we follow that logic that I just mentioned that goes along with the performance chain. And our perspective on this, a few years ago, there was an article in Harvard Business Review, actually, and I keep mentioning this article because I think it's a really cool thing, where they talked about agile talent development. And what they meant by that was basically a process where coaching becomes a very big part of the ongoing development of people. In other words, what this article said was that this typical learning plan or quarterly development plan maybe is okay, but things change a lot. And so we can do all the stages of talent development. We can do hiring. If we know what that person's job is and what their outputs are supposed to be, we can have behavioral interview questions. We can have maybe some performance tests at the very beginning. And then once we hire somebody, we can onboard them by being sure they're up to speed on the most important accomplishments or outputs that they need early, and then a little bit later, and then maybe the ones they only do so often. We can have specific training modules or job readiness sessions that are focused on work outputs. And then we can move people into that cycle where coaching is the engine, where ongoing individual coaching with each person is like, oh, well, let's work on this one because this is important for you. And then we can use those outputs and what people have mastered in terms of their ability to produce the outputs. We can use those when we get into promotion and transfer and exporting talent. We can use them to look at compensation. So accomplishments can serve every single step or part of the talent development process. And I would argue in a more focused and measurable way than in most cases. And there's a webinar there, the QR code would get you to, that talks about that. We also, I'm proud to say that several months ago, Talent Development Magazine, TD Magazine, which is the Association for Talent Development, published an article by me that's explicitly about accomplishment-based talent development, because we'd like to make that more widely understood. We think everybody talks about skills-based talent development. Well, that's fine, but the value is in the accomplishments. So let's define the accomplishments and then figure out what the skills are that somebody might need among the other behavior influences. So one of the things we've observed is that coaching that we've seen, and we've looked through a bunch of books, and Ian's looked at a few of them, and he may have some comments about this too. And we've talked to people and we've observed people, and it looks to us like most coaching in the business world doesn't look like athletic coaching. It's not accomplishment based. It's, if anything, behavior based. And one of the most interesting conversations that I ever had about this was with a series of salespeople. We often, when we do sales enablement work, we interview successful salespeople and ask them about the milestones or the outputs in their sales process. What are they trying to achieve at each step? And on several occasions, we've been working in organizations where there was a coaching program where the field manager would ride with the rep on some regular basis, and they would coach them, and they would do it around behavior, like delivering the message or using open-ended questions or whatever. And so we talked to the sales representatives and said, well, how's that coaching process going for you, And they said, well, I mean, a bunch of them said this. When the manager's riding with me, I know exactly what she wants me to do. I know what's on that checklist, so I do all that behavior. But if she's not with me, that's not the point. The point is, what am I going to accomplish in my next call? So they're looking at outputs on a day-to-day basis, even though they're happy when it conform to whatever the manager wants. One of the things we've observed, and that little bit that says what ChatGPT says will get you to a ChatGPT interaction I had a few days ago, where I said, why is it I forget the question I asked, but basically, why is most business coaching behavior based? And what ChatGPT told me, and as I looked at it, I thought about it. Managers are often coaching to business results. They're trying to help people achieve business results, which is usually a pretty far link from the immediate day to day, unless you're a salesperson. And so they try to identify behavior that might lead to those business results. Largely, we believe, because most managers or other professionals don't really understand what we mean by work outputs, how to define jobs that way. And so we've also noticed that business results are usually the result of a lot of different work outputs in most cases. And so individual goals might be difficult to define because maybe there's a lot of stuff you have to get better at doing. Whereas, of course, if we talked about the work output, it would all focus on that. And we could then be sure people produce that to spec rather than just focus on the behavior. And then the other thing that's interesting about it is that, and ChatGPT said something about this, is that business coaches have to work in changing conditions, changing context, where sometimes the behavior needed to produce a thing is different from situation A to situation B. And that can be problematic because, like, which behavior do we focus on? Now, our take on this is that in that last point is a phrase that my former partner coined years ago when she said, work outputs liberate behavior. And what she meant was, if we define the product, there may be several ways to get there, some more effective in some situations than others. So in many situations where the behavior does not have to be precisely specified, like in a nuclear submarine or high risk safety environment, you can behave in a lot of different ways to produce the output. So we think that the part of the problem with most coaching programs is they simply don't understand this notion that behavior produces work outputs, which are things that contribute to business results. And so they try to jump essentially from behavior to organizational results. Now, this may be a little bit simplistic, and you may push back on it. We'll see what you say. But that seems to be what's going on in a lot of places. And our 30 years or so of experience of trying to teach people about work outputs and accomplishments suggests that most of us don't think that way once it gets beyond very concrete deliverables. The thing about work outputs, though, is it connects people up from their day-to-day behavior to business results. So it's really an important link in the conversation, including in the coaching conversation. So this is my last slide, basically. But what I'd like to say is that this focus of coaching on accomplishments is different in a variety of ways. First of all, it explicitly focuses on the value that people contribute, that is the outputs, the products of behavior, not just the behavior. The work outputs themselves serve as goals or objectives. So our goal here is to improve your ability to produce this kind of report, proposal, widget, assembly, relationship, decision, various outputs. I mentioned criteria for a good one. When we define an output, it's really useful to say what are the characteristics of that make it a good one, because that sets you up not only setting clear expectations for your performer, but also to provide really focused feedback and enable the person to be able to look at the product of their work and determine how well they're doing. We also then can monitor work outputs, which tends to be a heck of a lot easier than trying to pay attention to all the behavior. And in this context, and I suppose this is true for any coaching approach, but especially around accomplishments or outputs, both the employee and manager, or the coach and the coachee, share responsibility and credit for this because they are monitoring, observing, and collaborating about improving particular deliverables, particular outputs. And so what we would say, and this is a whole other conversation, but the phrase growth mindset, which I've always been a little bit leery of because it's a big concept, but servant leadership is another concept that's important and it's a little bit more tangible. This approach, which is explicitly about enabling the person you're coaching to be, first of all, more productive, literally with outputs, and secondly, to be engaged, sets the context for those two things. So that's sort of my comments. I'm going to take a quick chat, but hopefully, we got lots of good stuff in the chat box. It is being recorded, Scott. definitely it'll be on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much. Yes, that's right. Most leaders don't know how to coach any other way beside that. Right. So I'm gonna stop the slides here. So we have Ian and me just right here. So this is Ian Paterson, our senior associate, and I don't know if you want to say anything about yourself, uh, but let's just go
Yep.
for it. Okay.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Hi,
yeah,
everybody.
this will be fun. So we want to kind of expand on the kind of fire hose that I just aimed at people, and so if you're talking to people or if you're trying to explain to people, and I should mention one of the things that's cool about Ian is he has a really solid background in behavior science, which is of course where I come from at the University of North Texas, but he's also worked in telesales and managed people. So this is a guy with real experience in the business world. This is not strictly just academic. And so in that context, what do you think if we say, well, why be accomplishment based? What's the point? How would you respond to that?
Usually, the way I describe it to people, like my little catchphrase, is that it's simple, but it's not easy. And I think context the way that you described it is so true. It contextualizes everything that you're doing, and in that side that you brought up with the business results and skipping over the outputs to the behavior, that's exactly how I kind of describe it to people. Is like everybody knows that you have to basically sell things for more than it costs to produce them, and you have to have people who are doing a lot of things to get those things to be valuable, right? So most traditional approaches are saying, okay, well, like do things, be busy, we can assume these things that they think they need to be productive at, but if you define the outputs, then you automatically have, okay, this is valuable because X, and now we can have a criteria for like, okay, this is why this is not the same thing as that thing, and this is why this is better than the other one. And
Mm-hmm.
so it just all kind of like clicks together once you have that context in there. So I don't think it's that people necessarily don't understand what accomplishments are, is they don't have the context of why they make behavior valuable to business results, why they are that critical link in the chain.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, at some level, even I find our colleagues in the organizational behavior management world or the performance improvement world talk about accomplishment based, but often the accomplishments are closer to business results. They're big hunks. They're like, for any
Mhm.
given job, there's 5 accomplishments. Well, we don't think so. We think most jobs have a lot more outputs. The other thing that what you were just saying reminded me of is a lot of us, I think, Tom Gilbert talked about the cult of behavior. And if you think about training and development or human resources as a large field, and most of the people probably are who are teaching coaching, who are trying to implement coaching, are coming from kind of a training point of view, kind of a skills and knowledge behavior point of view. And so that's a world also that thinks about behavior. And most folks are not accomplishment based in their training. But I think you're right. I do believe, though, because it's turned out to be much harder to get people to really crisply define the products of behavior. I think it is because people
Mhm.
don't fully get that. Because I tell you, and some people in this group will know that, we have these like discrimination exercises where we show people, descriptions of behavior, description of outputs, and then they all get it right. Verbs versus nouns or whatever. And then we send them out to interview people, and they come back with all these outputs that have verbs in them. It's like, where did that come from? That's behavior.
Mhm.
So I think it's challenging. So what? And I think you've answered kind of my next question, which is why do you think most coaching is behavior based? It seems to be focused on behavior. Is there anything to
Yeah,
add to that?
for sure. And I think it's important that we're talking about this in the context of coaching too, because I think the coach as a role in an organization, especially in a larger organization, is really that kind of boots on the ground connection between this like organizational level, like goal or aspiration of like, we're doing this big thing. And like, there's real people doing things who have their own motivations that don't like, maybe your person on the factory floor isn't motivated by a $4 billion quarter because they're getting paid the same whether or not,
That's a good
but
point.
but what is valuable to them, like they're working for a paycheck to send their kids to school or just pay their bill or whatever. The coach can be the person who can find what's valuable to them and connect that up to the business results by saying, hey, what you produce is valuable here for these reasons, and here's how it leads frogs up to, it's not a $1 billion quarter, but it is valuable to you.
You know, that goes that links out to something that's a little bit off topic, but I want to mention it anyway. One of the things I learned from my former partner, Cynthia Rhea, was talking about the 6 boxes. Box 6 is motives and preferences. And I always used to be really aggressive about, we always got to start with box 1, expectations. If expectations are unclear, nothing else works. And she said, wait a minute, a good manager or leader or coach starts with box 6 for exactly the reason you just described, which is maybe we care about the $1 billion, but we want to find out what this person cares about, because are they aligned with the values of the organization?
Mhm.
What's a good payoff for them? Blah, blah, blah. Once you know that, all the rest of it fits in. So
Mhm.
that's another point. What you know, the other thing that I'm struck by as I listen and just even to myself and what you said is that we know outputs define the successful product of behavior. So you're done. Like you write a document, or you have a meeting and you make a decision, and you look at the characteristics of the decision or the document or whatever that output is. And if you know what the criteria for good one are, I'm done. I'm successful. This
Mhm.
worked. And so I
Mhm.
think that's another compelling reason for just ordinary folks working in an organization to have their focus on the products, because they can feel pretty good about it when it meets criteria. I know when I write a good paper or something and I read, I say, oh, this is pretty good, because I
Mhm.
recognize the product was valuable. What's your sense? Do you have anything to expand on that idea?
Yeah, I think it's just really putting people. It's kind of giving them that kind of um, reassurance of like, okay, we're gonna show you how this works, that your work is valuable, but then here's the actual proof of like, here's okay, I am holding this document that I created, and I know exactly why it's valuable, and it looks good, and maybe even it's nice for me to go back and look at it sometimes. People like you and I have talked about when we write something, we like to go back and read what we've written. That's
That's true.
valuable to us, not necessarily to the thing that we've written it for,
That's
but it
true.
kind of allows you to kind of tease out these different like individual motives and preferences of like, oh, I would never would have thought that someone liked things that way, but now that I do, I can definitely implement that into how our relationship works together, as a
Mhm.
coach and a coachee.
I'm just noticing a couple things in the chat box I want to comment on before they scroll off.
Mhm.
One is responding to Marlena, which is that if you go on our YouTube channel at performancethinking.tv, there's a little playlist on coaching, and it really outlines it really describes the process that we teach in our performance thinking coach program. So we actually have a coaching program that does teach this, and it works pretty well, I have to say. And then the other one I wanted to respond to was Scott, and I wanted to connect you up to someone else here. Scott has a comment about strategic plans that have a whole lot of behavior. Well, there's another person in this group, Peter Doms, who is a master strategic planning guy, and we've worked together a little bit. And we actually did a webinar that's on our YouTube channel. It's about making strategic plans executable or more executable. And the way Peter does it is he insists that strategic objectives be accomplishments, not behavior. So you guys might want to talk to each other, Scott and Peter. Sorry, but I didn't want to. I just couldn't pass that one up. Um, so you've already mentioned the criteria thing. But there's another thing that's interesting too, and I kind of pointed to it.
Oh, can I
Um,
actually really quickly like, expand on the criteria thing? One thing that I meant to say, that I didn't there, and maybe this is where you were going, is that especially from the behavior science world, and I think there's a couple people in here who have come from applied behavior analysis, or and that's mostly working with kids, things like that. We have this concept of the learner is always right, and
mhm.
essentially what that means is that when you're kind of having this back and forth dance with someone behaviorally, or in a coaching scenario for that matter, you're what you're setting up for that person is how they're going to respond. So you have to kind of own your procedures and your process, and that like, I'm shaping this person. It's not like, oh, they got it wrong, so they're defective. It's like the environment wasn't right for that to happen. And that's exactly what we're kind of coaching coaches to do, is that obviously once you've got the outputs, then you can kind of dig into like, okay, now we know what behavior is valuable. and we also know why it's motivating. So it's
Yeah.
valuable to the individual, and the track step is valuable to the organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was actually just going to sort of raise the issue about behavior because, as you say, sometimes you can. I mean, implicit in what you said, you kind of said it almost explicitly. You can change your behavior to produce the thing, right? I mean, it depends
Right.
on the context. And the other thing that I'm reminded of is that a lot of times coaching to behavior isn't what's necessary. It's something else. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, you need a tool to do that. Or like one director we were actually delivering our coaching program said to his manager, well, I want you to spend about 10% of your time to coach your people, develop your people. And so time is a resource, right? It's a big one. And
Mm-hmm.
so he said, and if you find that you're too busy or you don't have enough time to do that, come to me and we can rearrange your priorities so you do have time. So that's a really simple example of where somebody says, you know how to do this, you just don't have the resource, which is time to do
Right.
it. And then the other thing I'm struck by is, a lot of people here in this group are performance improvement people. And if you've read Tom Gilbert or if you generally know about the notion of exemplary behavior, sometimes people discover tricks, things that produce the thing way faster, way more
Mm-hmm.
efficiently, higher quality than everybody else. And of course, our hope is we can figure out what those tricks are by observing and interviewing people and share them with other folks. But a coach can help in that way. It's like, well, maybe you should try to get that appointment in another way. Maybe, or like we was interviewing salespeople once, and one guy was saying, "Oh yeah, I always invite my clients to my Super Bowl parties," and we talked to another person, and she says, "No, I don't think I do that, but I have a lot of lunch dates with my clients." So they have different ways of developing those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Okay, so and then the other thing, and I think anytime we talk about coaching, it's important to say this, and it almost doesn't matter what the form of coaching is, which is the notion of a regular cadence. And my guess is, as I look at the people in this group, most people here are pretty experienced folks, but we've introduced our program to companies where the organization did not work with us as much as we would have liked to really set the context for making the thing successful. They tend to do the, spray and pray or one and done kind of, okay, you know how to coach, go do it. But one of the things I've learned is that if we don't set clear expectations, that you ought to check in with your people at least once every other week, maybe every week in a coaching way, it just drifts. And then what happens is people kind of pull it out when they're having a problem. And that's usually too late. And especially with this accomplishment based approach, because it has the potential for developing people's capabilities in a very proactive way. You want to have that be the constant stream of conversation, not something you just say, oh my God, we're in trouble, we're going to do this. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's
Well,
all it kind
that's
of.
something I've come across a lot in the reading that I've done, is especially in the more corporate oriented coaching books. Of it tends to start in that it's like, okay, so you've got a disciplinary issue. Here's how to go about it, right?
Mhm.
It's coaching is like you're like a principal, right? Or like the adult at a daycare. Like you're just there to keep the people in line and then let them be busy doing things otherwise.
Well,
And so it's almost like this thing, like we talk about training, that you throw it at a problem once you realize you have a problem, and then it's like, okay, it's done. You've been coached.
right, right.
Have a good one. You know.
Well, I noticed in the chat box, Shelly had a comment earlier, Shelly Smith, how have you kept behavior from taking over the focus of business results? Well, it's not always easy, but if we're focused on outputs, if we know and if our personal coaching knows that we're working on developing their ability to produce valuable stuff, and if they're already perfect at everything they do, then to add to it for their next career path step or whatever it is, we kind of the problem with just focusing on business results is it can get kind of vague in many ways. But if you are focusing on getting better at this thing, it's not like we want to ignore inappropriate behavior. We might have a conversation with the person on the side, and we may use some other coaching methodologies to help them in a kind of a therapeutic way or whatever it takes. But the focus keeps coming back to developing your ability to produce something of value for the team, for the organization in the process. And
Mhm.
I don't think that avoids completely the problem, But if the focus is on your valuable contributions, my observation is that tends to pull things forward and you don't get as sidetracked by inappropriate behavior in most cases. So we've got a few minutes left. I wonder if we've got lots of chat people here. So I wonder, we've only done this once before, but it actually worked pretty well, which is, I'm just setting it so I think you can request to speak if you want to. And I think you have to do it, and then I say, okay, you can. But does anybody want to add comments with your microphone rather than just or questions or comments? Got some great stuff in the chat box. I realize I haven't even looked at the end of it yet. But anybody who wants to say anything, what kind of training does it take? I like John's comment. I've actually heard performers say, I didn't know you wanted that. So that suggests we could do a better job in defining the output and criteria for a good one. Check-ins are important. Yeah, Deidre says, allows you to see any and all obstacles for the employee and the employer. With check-ins, you can identify things that may have been changed through the course of the year. That's absolutely right. You keep up with what's going on. I mean, this is a big vision, of course, but I've always seen these two little models we have, the performance chain and the 6 boxes model, as being simple enough that people can sort of carry them around in their head and view the world that way. Now, for performance professionals, that gives them a methodology. But for coaches and people they're coaching, it gives them a way to start to think about continuously improving themselves and each other. And so I'm struck that things like seeing obstacles or addressing things as they change is something you can do very flexibly. We still need to deliver these valuable products, but maybe the conditions change, so we have to do something different with time or resources, or we need some staff to help you in box 2, or maybe you do need a new skill here, and then we teach that to you. But
That's
Kevin,
such an important point too, in that we talk about business results being lagging indicators and work outputs being leading indicators. By the time if you're reviewing these lagging indicators quarterly or yearly, you don't have time to make effective decisions based off of like that data. But if you're having, bi-weekly or weekly check-ins with someone that you're mentoring, you can get real-time progress of how they're doing pretty well. I mean, that's almost as much as a one-on-one teacher.
Yeah, it's a living relationship then, and certainly if you're if they're your direct report, or if you're getting coached by your manager, presumably they're aware enough of your work that they can say, that's really good, you're getting better at those reports. So I want to address Kevin's question. Kevin says, could you hear more examples of outputs? So a couple things about that, Kevin. You got it right. We have criteria. We say that a work output or an accomplishment is a thing. It's not behavior, it's a thing, and it's not the measure of the thing. It's a thing that can be counted, and there's no verbs, because verbs are action or behavior. So it can be, and there's different types. There's things like deliverables, which are concrete stuff that you can see or touch, like documents, widgets, like that. But there's a lot of not so concrete ones, like a good decision. A hiring decision is an output. You go through a lot of work to hire the right person, but once you make a hiring decision, that is a thing, or a funding decision, or any other decision, or a relationship. We did a whole webinar that's on our YouTube channel about relationships as valuable accomplishments. And initially, people think that's like kind of weird, but if you reflect on it, you work really hard to establish and maintain good working or personal relationships. And if you look carefully at it, and we've done this with groups before, you can figure out what characterizes a good one of this particular relationship, and then we can work to achieve it. Or things like suggestions or recommendations, which might seem like fleeting statements, but very well, you can give somebody a recommendation, and if it's worded properly or presented properly, they get it and they can apply it. Or sometimes you can give a recommendation and people walk away and say, I don't really know what he was talking about. So we can talk about even things like that as good or not, like a good feedback is another example. So I don't know if that helps, Kevin. If you poke around in our YouTube channel. There's, for example, a great webinar that I did with Therese Longo, who's one of our longtime colleagues at Radcom in Ohio. We did a thing on job profiles because she and her colleagues have been focusing on accomplishment-based job profiles. And there's a lot of examples in there about that. And even if you go back and look at the recording of this session, look at the 3 examples of individual performance maps, you'll see a lot of different kinds of outputs there. So hopefully that will be helpful.
I think Shelley had requested to speak. They took it away, but I don't know. Shelley, if you still wanted to say something.
Yeah, go for it. I probably just didn't see the request. I'm not that hip on how this works right now. Let's see. How does that work? Speak. Okay, you can raise your hand.
Oh, she typed it in the chat. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Well, anything else that people want to say, ask, or add to this? I really appreciate all of the chat you got in there. There's a lot of good stuff. Mm-hmm. Lots of thank yous, but also a lot of interesting points. I'm wondering, I'm looking at the names here, and I'm wondering if anybody here has been in organization.
Erwin's got something to say to us. Let me see. I accepted his request to speak.
Good deal, Erwin.
But I don't know if he's popping in or not.
I don't see the request. That's the problem. Okay, there he is. Hey, Erwin.
Hi, Carl. You got to figure out how to blank out the background or have me move to a small cubicle to talk.
It looks real comfortable to me. You actually can.
Comfortable.
I think at the top of your screen you can change it, but it's no big deal.
Not in this
Oh, is that right?
Program, yeah.
Okay.
In Zoom, it's perfectly easy, but with this thing, it doesn't give you that option to choose a background.
Well, for me, it does. You can
see. You're the owner of it, right?
Okay, I wasn't sure about that, but my background would be horrible if I used my.
Nevertheless, what I was thinking about this as you're talking, and I'm going, the language that's used in organizations by most of the managers, I don't think since the 80s I haven't people say, oh, we need to do continuous performance improvement, right? Mm-hmm. So the language, I made a list of things, right? So they say, go and design something, go and reduce something, go improve something, go develop something, things like that. And then they say, design something that, and that's where it becomes operational.
Yeah.
But not in the way that people need. So for example, I was given a task, go redesign our performance management process. And one of the goals of it was to reduce the amount of time it takes managers to submit the process, a rating basically. Mm-hmm. And I found that they were spending, 4 to 8 hours writing essays on their employees. And I figured out a way to write the essay for them with checkboxes and some short words. So I reduced it to about an hour and a half or less. Okay, yep. So that was a concrete thing. But that was only one of the things that took to redesign the process.
Yeah.
So I don't think my work was not changing people's behavior my goal was not directly to change people's behavior, although that was one of the goals. Mm-hmm. It was to design this new way of approaching this whole process.
A new design for the process. That's an output in its own right.
And that's pretty typical of the kinds of goals that I think managers set. They rarely get down to the minutia of the goal because most of us don't know the details yet till they start doing more, the employee starts doing more work to give us some interim feedback, which is why you have continuous discussions, right? You modify the goals as you go along the way, as you learn that, oh, that's never going to be achievable. So let's do this thing instead.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I was just going to say that, the marketing of this is a very different process that has to do with branding it in a way that it relates to how managers and employees talk.
That's
And I
true.
think that's the challenge of this.
I agree with you. I mean, you know, we, as you may have noticed, our company name and our trademark that we focus on is performance thinking, because we say whoever it is that's involved, you're looking at performance in a different way, and here's the elements. But I think you're right. I guess I like Tom Gilbert's notion that what we're looking for is the valuable products of behavior. That doesn't teach people how to do it, but at least it says it's the thing that you deliver. And you delivered even though I'm not a big fan of performance management processes that involve Likert scales, because I think they're a refined opinion, but be that as it may, you defined a more time efficient process for doing that. So that's a good thing that has criteria that you met, it seems like. Is that fair in your case?
Yeah, except it ends up being like 20 things in order to make it work.
Fair enough. Yeah, you may have a whole bunch. Well, it's just like a process. You know, a lot of people, and we could go way off on other domains here, but you know, a lot of process folks that are really good at defining the final product of a process. But if you look at the steps inside, they don't always say what each step produces and gets passed on to the next thing. And doing that makes it so much easier to monitor and to problem solve and to all the rest of it. So at some level,
manufacturing, you can do some different things that are the pieces of the process, and
yes.
I think they resonate well to things like Aubrey Daniels' approach, because it's simple to them. And
yeah, it's true.
So,
well, our thing's pretty simple. The hard part is learning how to do individual performance.
That's why I'm here a lot. I like it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So I think we're just about at the end. Anybody else have any comments? I appreciate we can always depend on you to make a good comment, Erwin. So I appreciate that a lot. Anybody else want to add anything? You have any last thoughts, Ian? You want to share with people?
No, this has been great. I wish this was 3 hours long. I feel like we could talk about this forever. But yeah, Deidre, I don't know if you got a chance to get had some really good insights in the chat just about encouraging people to complete a professional development plan before they're that's direct towards work output. And there was one earlier that they encourage check-ins for all of their executive state agencies in Georgia, which is encouraging too. I would love to see this kind of approach all over bureaucracy and everywhere else in general too. So.
But the missing piece still is defining outputs. And one of the things that we've found in both our performance consulting program and our coaching program is initially it's hard for people usually to get this outputs thing. Once they do, it's like a light goes on. But for example, when you do one of those individual performance maps for a person and you ask them, you say, do you think we got it all? And they look at it and say, oh my God, that's my whole job on a single piece of paper. And if you tried to do that with behavior or competencies or some other silly thing, it wouldn't have done it. But we can actually look at the whole job and probably we haven't missed any outputs. And if we're going to add another thing, we can add it on there. So if we can teach that piece, then people can coach to that a heck of a lot easier than if they don't understand that. Anyway, thank you, everybody. We'll be back next month talking about how we talk about business results. And we also, as Ian just said, we're not quite ready to sort of reach out, but if any organizations or individuals are interested in participating in one of the first few pilot groups for this coaching program that's been revised, please, you can contact Ian or me or come into our website. We'd love to know about your interest. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
I think we're done.